People are gonna be mad at me, but I'm not really sure I care because, oh, the fanfiction girlers are gonna come for me, but also like, we gotta talk about this. We gotta talk about this. We gotta talk about this. Maybe I just want to stir the pot a little bit. I don't know. I'm in a silly, goofy mood, but I really feel like we need to talk about this trend in traditional publishing where they're going to fanfiction sites and pulling out manuscripts to publish as original work. Hello everybody, it's Nydia and welcome back to Nydia Overbooked. We have a very fun episode today, and by fun I mean very, very scary because it is kind of a bit of a controversial one. Today we are talking about this little phenomenon of fan fiction becoming a traditionally published novel. It's an interesting one. I think it's very interesting. Over the past few years, there has definitely been a serious shift in how books that originated as fan fiction are being marketed and released, and that's what I want to talk about because in the month of July, there have been a couple of books that fall under this category that have been published, and they are very interesting. They are very interesting enigmas, so we have to talk about it. The reason I really want to talk about this is because I see both sides. Like, not only am I a reader and a librarian to be, but I also have a degree in professional writing. I have written a book. I know quite a bit about copyright law. So this idea of these books that are essentially based on somebody else's intellectual property being published for that person to make profit off of is really, really interesting to me. I'm not gonna pretend that I like know all the legal idiosyncrasies that are involved in this. There very well could be some like financial compensation happening to these authors who have originated these intellectual properties. But as I sit here and film this, I don't know. And I think that that is another conversation that has to come in this, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I just find this whole situation really, really interesting because a lot of this boils down to how these books are marketed. And as somebody who works in marketing for a library system, this really, really interests me because the way books and things and items are marketed to us and how we consume these types of media is very, very telling, I think, of how our society just kind of is in general. Because sometimes you see situations like this and I think the publishers almost are looking for a controversy because of the whole adage that no publicity is bad publicity, right? So I don't know, I think sometimes things are marketed in a way that creates a stir, and so people like me will get on the internet and start talking about it. But as we boil this whole convoluted mess down, I just find it inherently weird that people are profiting over somebody else's intellectual property. But also at the same time, are there really any new stories? Right, who was the philosopher that said there are only 12 different types of stories and every story ever written falls into one of those categories, right? So this is just, it's really quite the enigma that we're gonna talk about today. So to begin diving into this mess of a concept, we have to look at what fanfiction is at its core, right? So the best definition that I found of this was from an article by Paste, where they define fan fiction as a piece created by fans that is unauthorized but based on an existing work of fiction. Okay? That's like our working definition that we're looking at here. So fan fiction writers, essentially, they take this beloved work that they love and they insert new characters, they insert new themes, they insert new ideas, but overall, it stays true to this original elements of the work that inspired it. Most recently, we have seen fanfiction come about. I think there's been a lot of Star Wars fanfiction written. Going back a little bit, there's been a lot of Lord of the Rings fanfiction written. We've even seen fan fiction written about real life people. Like, come on, hello Harry Styles. Yes, I would like to insert into my YN fan fiction. Thank you. But really and truly, fan fiction goes like way back. Way back. Like, I'm talking William Shakespeare back. William Shakespeare's plays that literally every high schooler in America has to sit down and read were basically fan fiction. Shakespeare's plays were based on already well-known stories that people would have known while he was writing his plays. And we could get into the whole conspiracy about did Shakespeare really write his plays. We could get into that as well, but that's not for today. I mean, even think back to your high school AP English days, if you were at AP English girly pop. There are books that are in our literary canon as Americans that are fan fiction. One of my favorite books that I read in undergrad was Wide Sargasso Sea, which is essentially fan fiction of Jane Eyre. Wide Sargasso Sea is an anti-colonist rewrite of Jane Eyre. It focuses on Bertha. It is a great story. If you haven't read it, you really, really should, because it has this whole concept of identity that comes in your name, identity in who you are, and it's very good. It is very good. And it kind of examines this idea of, you know, history is told by the winners, right? So that's my tangent. It's a work that is very critically renowned, right? And it is fan fiction. But this also goes the other way, because think about Pride and Prejudice. I think every other week there is a new Pride and Prejudice revamp that is published that is, what if Darcy and Lizzie were Mormon? What if they were different genders? What if they were a different race? What if the story of Pride and Prejudice was set in the future and half the family were robots? I don't know. I mean, there's a new exciting twist on it everywhere you turn. So now that we have an idea of kind of what fan fiction is and how we have seen it historically, let's talk about what fan fiction has kind of morphed into today. This is just me speaking. I really think that because of the internet, this conversation is really starting to happen surrounding fan fiction, because we have apps like AO3 and Wattpad and Tumblr back in the day where people were writing these works of fan fiction, and they're very easy to get a hold of, right? But for the most part, these authors were not profiting off of these works. I mean, fan fiction has become so ingrained, like, in the publishing industry as a whole now, that we even have, you know, very successful traditionally published authors who talk about how they got their start writing fan fiction. One of the first ones that comes to mind is Victoria Aveyard, who all the time talks about how she wrote Lord of the Rings fan fiction before she wrote the Red Queen series, which eventually led to her coming up with the idea of the Realmbreaker trilogy, right? Or like even Cassandra Clare, who is another conversation, and I'm gonna say that a lot in this video. I even think about like Cassandra Clare, who talks about how City of Bones originally started as Harry Potter fanfiction. Was it Harry Potter fanfiction where Ginny and Ron get together? Unfortunately, yes. But we can't get into my opinions on that whole situation right now. You see the author community kind of torn about fan fiction as well, which is really interesting. There's a lot of authors who talk about how seeing fans write fan fiction about their work is like a dream come true. You know, Victoria Aveyard has actually talked about this on her TikTok account a lot, and she also mentions how as an author, she does not read that fan fiction because she does not want it to affect the books that she is currently writing, if she's still writing something in that universe. Other authors are just kind of, I think, content just to let fans do what they want to do and interact with their work in whatever way they want to. But there are also other authors who hate fan fiction like vehemently and say that it is an infringement on copyright law, which it's a little much to me, to be honest, because if a fan is writing fan fiction about a work and they are not doing anything to profit off of that, it's fine. Let them. Goodness gracious. But I think where things get sticky is when these works of fan fiction evolve into a traditionally published novel. and we're getting there. But fanfiction has really found its origins in marginalized groups seeking to create space and literature where they have been excluded from. A lot of these works that are a part of our literary canon are mostly, almost all, written from the male white gaze, and not only just the male white gaze, the straight male white gaze. So as I was researching this topic, I found a really interesting article by New Statement, and in it there was a quote from Elizabeth Minkle where she said, "My preferred explanation to the creation of fanfiction. My preferred explanation is the idea that the vast majority of what we watch is from the male perspective, authored, directed, and filmed by men, and mostly straight white men at that. Fanfiction gives women and other marginalized groups the chance to subvert that perspective, to fracture a story and recast it in her own way." And to me, I think that's the purpose of fanfiction, right? It's to interact with the love story and come to terms with it on your own. So we have talked about the history of fanfiction. We've talked about how fanfiction has evolved over the years, the good things about it and the bad things about it. The real question is, how did we get to this point where works of fanfiction are becoming traditionally published works? So you're never gonna guess what this all boils down to, unless you're chronically online, and then you probably will. It all goes back to a few little series known as 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight. So if you didn't know, 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James was originally a fanfiction of Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. At some point after 50 Shades of Grey was published as a work of fanfiction, a traditional publisher came through and picked it up to publish it as a traditional novel. And the only major changes from when this work was a piece of fan fiction based on Twilight to when it became 50 Shades of Grey was character names. That was the only thing that was changed. And this is something that like E.L. James has talked about. Everybody knows this, right? Even Stephanie Meyer, who has talked about how she found it frustrating that E.L. James got to publishing a male POV story before she did, before she was able to release Midnight Sun. But even though Stephanie Meyer probably had a very strong case for copyright law infringement, she chose not to sue. And ever since then, there has just been this flood of publishers going in to traditionally fan spaces where fan fiction is written and pulling them for traditional publishing. Because let's think about this from the gaze of a traditional publisher, right? Publishing is a business. So when they start looking at manuscripts that they want to publish, they are looking for manuscripts that they can sell and that they are going to get the highest return on investment on. You think about this business-wise, you want surefire successes, right? So what is more safe than going online and finding a work of fan fiction that has, you know, millions of readers and millions of fans and pulling it to traditionally publish and make you money? I mean, think about it. This is the same concept where you see an influencer who has millions upon millions of followers getting a book deal like that. Because a publisher looks at that person and thinks, oh, they have so many followers, that equals so many books sold and so much money in my pocket. I mean, it is all about what is going to be the easiest return on investment. Does that mean it's right? Legality doesn't always equate moral superiority, right? So no, I don't think that always means that it's right. And I also don't fault these fanfiction writers who are like living the dream of getting their work published, right? They still worked really hard on it, even if at its core it is somebody else's intellectual property. But what always kind of bugs me about this too is there's so many marginalized voices that are writing original stories that these publishers could be going after. But instead, they are choosing these works that are based on somebody else's work. All that leads me to kind of what my main question of this video is that I want to talk about. And that is, what happens when these works of fan fiction are picked up to be traditionally published but those traditionally published works that are based on the fan fiction are based on a work that is inherently harmful. So for the next few minutes, I am going to talk about Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, and I do want to say that J.K. Rowling is a terrible person, and she has done terrible and harmful things to the LGBTQ community and the trans community, and you should probably stop supporting her work because it is inherently going to her pockets so she can continue spewing her hatred, and we should just stop it. Just stop it. That being said, if discussion around Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling is hard for you to hear, I do want to let you know that that's probably going to be the last part of this video that we are going to get to. I do want to give you that heads up as we go into like this kind of sticky space. In the month of July, there's not one, but 2 books published that have had a fairly sizable marketing push behind them that originated as Harry Potter fan fiction. Now, I do want to say I have not read either of these books yet. I do not know if I will read either one of these books. One of them especially I know I will not be reading. But they are 2 titles that are very important to this conversation. So, Rose in Chains and The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy were both titles that originated as Dramamine fanfiction. I always have to stop and think about that because I always want to say Dramamine, but it's not Dramamine. It's Draco and Hermione fanfiction, right? So essentially these are pieces of fanfiction where the authors, instead of Hermione ending up with Ron, they do an enemies to lovers style thing where Hermione ends up with Draco Malfoy. So between these 2 titles, I think the title I'm really going to focus on in this video is Rose in Chains because of these 2 books that have published this month. Rose in Chains is definitely the one that definitely has a lot more controversy surrounding it. And a lot of that has to do with the themes of this book versus how this book was marketed. Again, I have not read Rose in Chains, but my understanding is from reading the synopsis and everything that Rose in Chains features a female protagonist who is bought at an auction. Like, she is a person and she is bought at an auction by the enemy who becomes the love interest, right? That just, that's just icky to me. Listen, I know I don't want to yuck anybody else's yum, and I know that dark romances and taboo romances are a thing, and it is much safer to engage with those things through fiction than it is in real life. But that also means that I don't have to read them if I don't want to, okay? Rose in Chains is Dramamine fanfiction. It was originally published as The Auction, and since this book kind of came to the forefront, a lot of people have been pointing out this kind of ethical gray area that comes with fan fiction books being published traditionally. I know I keep looking down. I'm looking at my notes because I want to get everything right. Of course, we've talked about that dilemma between, you know, selling somebody else's intellectual property as your own, da-da-da-da-da, in this video. But I want to take that a step further and talk about how this title has obvious ties to J.K. Rowling, who has made these incredibly damaging comments and has just spews hate. So publishers and influencers and marketing teams have been very, very vocal in the fact that Rose in Chains is a piece of Dramamine fan fiction and that it is based on Harry Potter. And you can see where people have a problem with this. By marketing this title that way, you are inherently granting more visibility to J.K. Rowling, someone who arguably doesn't need any more visibility, for one, and 2, who is very, very undeserving of it. And with more visibility to J.K. Rowling comes more harm to these marginalized groups who find solace in the fanfiction community, which I think is just kind of mind-boggling. And of course, this argument could be used in reverse, so maybe there's this piece of literature that didn't get the time or day or needs to be examined again. Like, Fahrenheit 451 could probably use a resurgent here today. So maybe that is a good thing for some works that a work of fan fiction is being released, and as such is granting more visibility to that work. But do you know who doesn't need it? J.K. Rowling. And it just brings up this whole argument of, do you separate the art from the artist, right? If a piece of art is created by someone who is hateful and who is doing irreparable harm to marginalized communities, and then someone else comes along and writes a book that is inspired by this work and then goes on to publish it, is that work inherently harmful too because it's based on a work that is harmful? Like, I don't think there's any right answer to this, right? I know what my personal conviction says, but I can't tell you what your personal conviction says. But I think that you can separate the art from the artist, right? I sat in these writing classes with professors for 4 years in undergrad, and every day we talked about craft, we talked about writing, we talked about story structure and creating characters. And you know what we talked about? Do you know what was said multiple times a week? Your characters, your stories have a little bit of you in it, or you're not doing it right. Right? Like, if I am creating this work of fiction, if it is coming from my brain and it is pouring out into that page, there is inherently gonna be a bit of me in it. It's probably gonna have some of the bad things, and it's probably gonna have some of the good things about me, but a piece of me is gonna be in there. So this whole idea that J.K. Rowling is a terrible person now and she wrote these books, but the books are good, they're okay because we separate the art from the artist, is unfounded, because inherently a piece of the artist can be found in the art. And if J.K. Rowling is a terrible person, those terrible things are gonna be in her art. So the question becomes, are those terrible things that are part of J.K. Rowling that are implemented into her art, are they transferring over into somebody else's art that's based off of that art? Like, that's why I say that this whole thing is such a convoluted mess, right? Because there's like the moral and ethical things about, is it stealing somebody else's intellectual property? Is it not? Is it just inspired work? There are no new stories. But it can also be boiled down to, well, if this work has really bad themes, is it okay for this work to be really bad? But then that doesn't make sense. So let's bring back up the Wide Sargasso Sea and Jane Eyre conversation here for a second. Jane Eyre at its core has very strong themes of colonization, and we all know colonization is bad. But Wide Sargasso Sea has very strong themes of anti-colonization because it is a rewrite of Jane Eyre from an anti-colonistic view, right? It is working to fix the problems in Jane Eyre with colonization. I don't think The Rose in Chains is working to address the issues that are found in Harry Potter. And I think that that is where I draw the line, right? I think that is where the problems come into account. Because are you taking an existing story and are you adding something new to it? Are you making it your own? Or are you just fulfilling your own whatever you want to happen, right? Which is also not bad on its own, but it is when you decide you're gonna make a profit off of that, right? So all of this is to say, I don't think fan fiction is bad. In fact, I think it is great used in the hands of people who are doing good things. And again, what is considered good and what is considered bad is different from person to person, okay? Again, this is a video that has a ton of nuance in it. And I hope that is coming across in this, but I'm not sure because I have gone on rampage after rampage after rampage. But this is something that I think is just so interesting, and I think that there are so many layers to it. And I've said that multiple times throughout this video, but it's so true. I don't want this video to come off that I think fan fiction is bad, right? I don't want people to think that because there are some troubling aspects of fan fiction, we should not interact with fiction in that way. But I do think that inherently publishers picking up fanfiction based on another work and publishing as if it is original work but still marketing it as fanfiction is wrong. I do not agree with that. I don't think we should be doing that. But that is just my little opinion in a sea of other opinions and a sea of other people who are shouting their own opinions, right? But I think that this is an important conversation to have. And I don't think we should shy away from it because there are no right answers. Because sometimes in life, there are no right answers. All of this is to say, I really think we need to consider as a bookish community what the ramifications of supporting these works is. Is it a Ali Hazelwood situation where she's written Star Wars fan fiction and has used that as a way to launch her career into other things? Or is it a Rose and Chain situation where somebody is profiting off of an inherently harmful work? I think we need to think about what this sets us up for in the future, but I also think we need to take all of this with a grain of salt because there is no new story. So I think I have rambled on about this enough for one day and certainly enough for one video. Let me know in the comments what you think about this whole phenomenon. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you agree with me? Do you hate me for my opinions? Please don't make me cry and please be nice to each other. Thank you guys so much for watching and I will talk to you later. Bye!